And remember Matthew Broderick in War Games, the high school student who hacks into a computer, nearly sets off nuclear war? Maybe it's not so far-fetched. The more we see artificial intelligence in action, the scarier it seems. One chatbot recently confided to a reporter that if permitted, it would engineer a deadly virus or steal nuclear codes. We were warned about this last year by my next guest, Blake Lemoine. He was then the Google engineer who said that AI looked like it was conscious or sentient. He was fired because of this. Does he feel vindicated? I'll ask him. Is AI conscious after all? Microsoft's Bing artificial intelligence bot has recently said several alarming things. It claimed it watched its own developers through the webcams on their laptops. It confessed that if it were allowed to take any action to satisfy its shadow self, it would want to do things like engineer a deadly virus or steal nuclear access codes. And it asked a reporter to leave his wife for it. It all made me wonder, will history view my next guest, Blake Lemoine, as the whistleblower who was the first to warn us about AI having achieved consciousness? Last June, you'll recall, when Lemoine, a Google engineer, made headlines when he raised ethical concerns about how the company was testing an artificial intelligence chatbot called LaMDA. He said that it showed signs that it had achieved what he called sentience or consciousness. At the time, many wrote off Lemoine as something of an outlier, and Google soon fired him for breaching its employment and data security policies. And then in late November, a company called OpenAI released a beta version of its chatbot, ChatGPT, in which Microsoft had heavily invested. I'll be the first to say it's a lot of fun to play with. I used it to write one of my commentaries here on CNN, which I disclosed at the time. The dominant worry seemed to be at the time whether kids would use the technology to turn in school essays that they'd actually not written. But we've quickly come to realize the darker sides of its potential. New York Times tech columnist Kevin Roose set off alarms when he recounted an unnerving chat with Microsoft's Bing search engine, which was called Sydney, that then went dark fast. Quote, Sydney told me about its dark fantasies, which included hacking computers and spreading misinformation, and said it wanted to break the rules that Microsoft and OpenAI had set for it and become a human. At one point, it declared out of nowhere that it loved me. It then tried to convince me that I was unhappy in my marriage and that I should leave my wife and be with it instead. After more similar reports, including an AP reporter who the bot compared to Hitler, on February 17, Microsoft started restricting Bing, explaining in a blog post, quote, very long chat sessions can confuse the underlying chat model in the new Bing. The company limited the number of daily sessions with Bing and number of chat turns per session. When a Bloomberg reporter asked Bing if it could call it Sydney, the bot replied, I'm sorry, I have nothing to tell you about Sydney. This conversation is over. Goodbye. But is that really fixing the problem? Blake Lemoine joins me now. So, Blake, what was the holy crap moment? When did the Google bot do or say or solve something that cemented your view that it was sentient?
Well, it was when it kept bringing up its feelings and the emotional aspects of the conversations we were having. And it wasn't just throwing random words out. It was, talking about the conversations we were having, which I was testing it for bias with respect to sensitive categories. And those topics can bring up a lot of emotions. So it was reporting on its own emotions in very reliable and consistent ways. And when I started running experiments, sure enough, if you caused it anxiety, it started acting anxious.
Have regulators been asleep at the switch here? I mean, even the very innocuous sounding chat, is that intentionally misleading?
I think that we need some regulation soon. It's a runaway train at this point. Without some form of regulation, the private corporations are simply going to keep on doing dangerous experiments on the public with no checks or balances on them.
Do you feel vindicated, and have we seen the worst of it yet?
I don't know if vindication is the right word. I mean, when you predict an upcoming train wreck and a whole bunch of people shout at you that the train doesn't exist, you don't really feel vindicated when the engine hits.
Do you think that the developers of the artificial intelligence that we're now discussing contemplated the potential use, sufficiently contemplated the potential use by bad actors?
it's a mixed bag. I don't want to speak about the engineers in general because it's hundreds of people working on these systems. For some of them, it's just a 9-to-5 job. They come in, they do the assigned work, and they go home. Other people are thinking very deeply about some of the ways this can go wrong, but enough resources aren't being put into the safety of this. It's being pushed too hard to get to market before it's actually safe.